What if one small act of kindness could change your entire life? What if something as simple as sharing an umbrella became the key to a future you never thought possible? Imagine this. Dark clouds cover the sky. Rain pours endlessly. The streets are empty. And then, one poor girl makes a choice. She hands over her only umbrella. Not for praise, not for reward, but simply to shield a homeless veteran, a man the world had long forgotten, from the storm. Now let me ask you, would you have done the same? Would you give away your last umbrella, knowing the rain would last for a whole week? Write your answer in the comments. I want to know what you think. And right now, before we dive into this story, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss the ending, because in just a few minutes, you'll see how this small act changed everything for her. The camera slows. The girl holds out her broken old umbrella, and the man in a tattered military jacket looks up at her with eyes full of gratitude. She stands in the pouring rain, soaked to the bone. She doesn't know it yet, but tomorrow. This moment will turn her entire life upside down. Her name was Aisha, 19 years old, but life had already carved deep lines of fatigue into her young face. Each morning began the same way, a cheap alarm clock rattling on the nightstand of her cramped rented room. 4 peeling walls, a creaky bed bought second-hand, and a stack of overdue bills staring at her like enemies she could never defeat. On the small desk lay her textbooks, biology, chemistry, literature, reminders of the dream she fought to keep alive. Finishing college, no matter the cost. But cost was the problem. The scholarships barely covered a fraction of her tuition, and the rest had piled into a mountain of debt. Every red-stamped envelope was a dagger, reminding her that time was running out. Some nights she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, whispering to herself, "Just one chance. If I get just one chance, I'll prove I can make it." To pay even a small piece of that debt, Aisha worked as a dishwasher in a tiny cafe on the edge of the city. The place was always noisy. The crash of plates, the sharp voices of the cooks, the smell of cheap frying oil clinging to her clothes long after she left. Her hands were raw from scrubbing. Her back ached from standing hours on end. But she never complained. At the end of each shift, she would drag herself home with a few crumpled bills in her pocket, convincing herself that every drop of sweat brought her closer to her dream. Her co-workers didn't understand. They teased her about her classes, her ambition, even her debt. College? One laughed. "With those bills, you'll be washing our dishes forever." Another smirked. "Maybe this is your real career, Aisha, scrubbing plates and dreaming big." They laughed loudly, making sure she heard. She swallowed her anger and said nothing. Words were wasted on people who couldn't see past the grease-stained kitchen. But what they didn't see was her determination. Every night, after work, she dragged her exhausted body back to her tiny room. She would peel off her soaked jacket, set down her old umbrella, and open her books. Her eyes stung with exhaustion, her fingers ached, but she studied, because to her, knowledge was the only light piercing through the storm of her circumstances. And that umbrella, that old broken thing with one bent spoke, was more than just a shield from the rain. It was a symbol, worn, fragile, imperfect, but still doing its job, just like her. Whenever the endless rains drenched the city, she clutched it tightly, whispering, "You and me, we'll make it through." That week, the storms were relentless. The sky was a heavy grey blanket, pouring rain for days with no break in sight. Walking home each night became a battle. The umbrella shielded her from the worst of it, but water still seeped into her shoes, ran down her sleeves, and chilled her to the bone. Yet every time she thought of quitting, she told herself, "If I give up now, then all the pain was for nothing." Sometimes she let herself dream. Passing by brightly lit apartments, she imagined living in one of them, a place warm, clean, filled with books and laughter. Instead, her reality was peeling wallpaper and the echo of loneliness. But the dream gave her strength. And then came that one night. The rain fell harder than ever, hammering against the pavement, bouncing off the umbrella like bullets. The streets were nearly empty, the world wrapped in water and darkness. Her shoes splashed through puddles as she hurried home, clutching the old umbrella over her head. That's when she saw him. At first, he was just a shadow on the sidewalk, hunched against the storm. As she drew closer, the details sharpened. An older man, grey-haired, sitting on the wet ground with his knees pulled to his chest. His clothes were worn, his shoes torn, and a faded military jacket clung to his thin frame. He wasn't asking for money, not even holding out his hand. He just sat there, trembling under the merciless downpour, as if the world had already decided to wash him away. Aisha slowed her steps. Her heart pounded. She gripped the handle of her umbrella tightly, staring at him. Something inside her stirred. Pity, fear, uncertainty. And then the thought crept in. If I give him my umbrella, I'll have nothing. Tomorrow it will rain again. Next week too. I'll be soaked every day on my way to work. She looked at the man again. His head was bowed, rain streaming down his face. He didn't even look up, as if he had forgotten what hope felt like. And in that moment, Aisha faced a choice. The kind of choice that seems small but changes everything. The rain came down in sheets, drumming against the sidewalk, splashing up from the gutters, soaking everything in sight. Aisha stood there frozen, staring at the old man hunched against the wall. Her umbrella shielded her for now, but she could feel the water creeping down her legs, filling her shoes. Her mind raced. If I give him this umbrella, what do I have left? Nothing. Tomorrow I'll walk to work drenched. I'll get sick. I'll miss shifts. I can't afford to miss shifts. My boss barely tolerates me as it is. If I lose hours, I lose money. If I lose money, I lose school. And if I lose school, I lose everything. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the handle tighter. She took a step as if to walk past him, her heart heavy. Someone else will help him. Someone richer. Someone with more to give. But no one came. The street was empty, save for the endless rain. No footsteps, no headlights, just the pounding storm and the quiet, broken figure on the ground. Aisha stopped again, her chest tightening. She could almost hear her mother's voice in her head, the words she had spoken countless times when Aisha was little. It doesn't matter how much or how little you have, Aisha. What matters is what you choose to share. That's the measure of who you are. Tears stung her eyes, mixing with the rain dripping from her lashes. She looked down at the old umbrella, bent, faded, but still strong enough to shield someone. Strong enough to shield him. Slowly, she stepped closer. The man barely moved. His shoulders shivered under the soaked fabric of his jacket, his head still bowed. Aisha crouched down slightly, holding the umbrella over him. "Sir?" Her voice cracked through the roar of the storm. He flinched, then lifted his head. His eyes, tired, bloodshot, lined with years of suffering, blinked at her in disbelief. "You'll get wet," he muttered hoarsely, his voice shaking from cold. Aisha forced a smile, though her throat tightened. "I already am." Before she could change her mind, she pressed the umbrella into his hands. "Take it, please." His fingers trembled as they closed around the handle. He looked at her as though she had just handed him the world. "No," he whispered. "I can't." "You can," she said firmly. "You need it more than me." The man clutched the umbrella to his chest, his lips quivering. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Only a single tear cut through the rain on his cheek. Aisha stood, the storm immediately battering her without mercy. Water streamed down her hair, her clothes clung to her skin, and her shoes squelched as she took a step away. Each drop felt like a punishment. Yet inside, something warm flickered, fragile but undeniable. She walked on, shivering, every part of her soaked, but her heart strangely light. Behind her, the man sat straighter, holding the umbrella above his head. For the first time in who knows how long, He wasn't completely exposed. As she turned the corner, Aisha whispered to herself, it was just an umbrella, but maybe it meant more than that. And so the night went on. One girl, drenched and exhausted, trudging through the rain. One veteran, shielded for the first time in years by someone else's kindness. Neither of them knew that this single moment, one bent umbrella in a storm, was the beginning of a chain of events that would change both of their lives forever. By the time Aisha stumbled back into her tiny room, she was soaked through as if she had stepped into a river. Her clothes clung to her skin, her hair dripped onto the floorboards, and her shoes squelched with every step. She dropped her bag by the door and peeled off her wet jacket, shivering violently. The old heater in the corner rattled, but gave off little warmth. She wrapped herself in a thin blanket and sat on the edge of her bed. Her throat already felt raw, her head heavy. She coughed, hugging herself tighter. Great, now I'll get sick. Just what I needed. She glanced at the empty space where her umbrella usually leaned, and a pang of fear struck her. The storm outside hadn't passed. The forecast promised rain for the whole week. That umbrella had been her lifeline, and now it was gone. Her mind screamed all the logical reasons why she shouldn't have given it away. But beneath that noise, another voice whispered, softer but stronger, you did the right thing. She remembered the veteran's eyes, how they had lifted to hers, full of disbelief and gratitude. That look, as if, for one fleeting moment, he felt human again. It burned in her memory, warming her chest, even as her body shook with cold. The next morning was no better. She woke up with a pounding headache and a fever. Her throat was raw, her nose clogged, her skin clammy. Every part of her wanted to stay in bed. But the clock glared at her, reminding her of the morning shift. If she missed work, her paycheck would shrink, and the bills on the nightstand would only grow taller. Dragging herself out of bed, she forced on her damp shoes and the same worn jacket. She had no umbrella now. The rain greeted her the moment she stepped outside, soaking her instantly. She hurried down the street, pulling the hood of her jacket low, but it was useless. The storm seeped into every seam. By the time she reached the cafe, she looked as though she had been pulled out of a river. Inside, the warmth of the kitchen was almost suffocating compared to the chill in her bones. The head cook scowled as she stumbled in late. "You're dripping all over the floor," he barked. "Customers don't want to see a drowned rat carrying their dishes." The waitresses giggled behind their hands. One of them leaned close to another and whispered, not quietly enough, "Look at her, always playing the martyr. I bet she gave away her umbrella to some drunk last night." The other laughed. "Yeah, because she's too stupid to think of herself. No wonder she'll never make it out of here." Aisha flushed, her cheeks burning hotter than her fever. She wanted to snap back, to tell them why she had no umbrella, to describe the veteran shivering in the rain. But she bit her tongue. She knew their type. They would never understand. To them, kindness was weakness. Instead, she tied on her apron and plunged her hands into the sink, scrubbing dishes until her skin stung. Each cough racked her chest, each sneeze made her co-workers laugh louder. During her short break, she sat alone in the corner, sipping lukewarm water. Her body ached, but in the back of her mind, the memory of last night replayed again and again. The look in the veteran's eyes, the way his trembling hands had clutched the umbrella as though it were salvation. Her lips curved into a faint smile despite everything. She whispered to herself, it was worth it. That evening, she trudged home under the relentless rain, shivering harder with every step. She collapsed onto her bed, coughing into her blanket. The room was cold, the bills still piled high, the storm still raging. But deep down, Aisha felt something no amount of ridicule could take from her. The quiet certainty that she had chosen humanity over survival. And somehow, it mattered. What she didn't know was that the consequences of her choice hadn't even begun to unfold. Somewhere in the city, the veteran she had helped was preparing to tell someone else about the girl with the broken umbrella. and that story would ripple further than she could ever imagine. The storm refused to relent. For 3 days straight, the city lived under grey skies and pounding rain. Streets flooded, umbrellas bloomed like dark flowers, and people rushed from one doorway to another, cursing the weather. But Aisha had no umbrella now. She hurried through the rain, with her hood pulled low, arriving at the cafe soaked to the bone each morning. Her co-workers only sneered. Still no umbrella? One waitress mocked as Aisha wrung water from her sleeves before tying on her apron. "What, did you lose it in a bet?" Aisha ignored them, retreating to the sink. The hot water stung her red, chapped hands, but she welcomed the pain. At least it reminded her she was still here, still fighting. That afternoon, the cafe door chimed and a woman stepped inside. She was nothing like the usual crowd of tired office workers or students seeking cheap coffee. This woman carried herself with quiet command. Her black-tailored coat shimmered with raindrops, her leather heels clicked sharply against the tiles, and her eyes, sharp, intelligent, swept the room with ease. She was the kind of customer who drew stares without trying. Aisha noticed her instantly, even from the corner by the dish pit. Something about the woman radiated power, though her expression was warm, almost kind. She took a seat at the far table, near the window streaked with rain. The manager rushed over, smiling nervously, wiping his hands on his apron before handing her a menu. The waitresses giggled among themselves, straightening their uniforms, eager to serve someone so clearly important. Aisha watched from the shadows, wiping plates dry, unnoticed as always. The businesswoman ordered tea and a salad. She sipped quietly, eyes distant, as if her thoughts were far away from the small cafe. She didn't notice the way the staff tried to impress her, or the way the manager hovered anxiously nearby. She seemed used to this attention, perhaps even tired of it. At one point, Aisha brought out a tray of dishes to stack on the counter near her table. Their eyes met for a brief second. The woman's gaze softened, curious, before Aisha quickly looked away, cheeks burning. It was only a moment, but in that instant, the businesswoman noticed something. The girl's wet sleeves clinging to her arms, the flush of fever in her cheeks, the exhaustion in her posture. There was a quiet dignity in her movements, a determination that seemed at odds with her position as just another dishwasher. Later, when the woman rose to leave, the waitresses fought for the chance to bring her bill. Aisha lingered by the sink, pretending not to watch. The woman placed a few crisp bills on the table and slipped her coat back on, pausing for a moment by the door. She looked back toward the dish pit, her gaze resting on Aisha again. This time, she didn't look away immediately. The manager noticed. "That one?" he asked, lowering his voice. "She's just our dishwasher. Works hard, but she's nothing special." He chuckled, as if dismissing Aisha would win favor. But the woman frowned slightly, not replying. She stepped out into the rain, her umbrella opening like a black wing. That evening, as Aisha trudged home through the storm, she didn't know that the same businesswoman had paused only blocks away to speak with someone else. The same veteran Aisha had sheltered days before. The woman had spotted him sitting outside a bookstore, the broken umbrella resting above his shoulders. Curious, she had stopped to ask where he'd gotten it. And the story he told, of a young girl who had given him her only umbrella, soaked herself to protect him, lodged in the businesswoman's heart. She didn't know the girl's name yet, but she had seen her face, and Aisha had no idea that fate had already begun weaving their stories together. The rain had driven most people indoors, but the businesswoman didn't rush. Her black umbrella sheltered her from the storm as she walked briskly down the avenue. She had appointments waiting, a driver idling at the curb, emails piling up on her phone, but something stopped her. A figure sitting hunched beneath a flickering streetlight, his knees drawn to his chest. It was the veteran. His grey hair was plastered to his forehead, his jacket threadbare. But over his head was a crooked old umbrella, bent and faded, barely holding back the downpour. The sight of it struck her. The umbrella looked so out of place, a fragile shield in a world that had clearly abandoned him. She slowed, curiosity tugging at her. Most people would have passed without a glance, but she stepped closer. "Excuse me," she said softly. The man flinched, lifting his head. His eyes were weary, but alert. "Where did you get that umbrella?" she asked. The veteran blinked at her, clutching it tighter, as if afraid she might take it. His lips trembled. "A girl. She gave it to me." "A girl?" The woman tilted her head. "Who?" He looked down, his voice breaking. "Young, maybe 19. Black girl. She didn't even stop to think. Just put it in my hands and walked away in the rain." His eyes welled up as he spoke. "Nobody's looked at me like that in years. Like I was still human. Like I mattered." The woman's chest tightened. In her world of boardrooms and contracts, acts of pure kindness were rare, almost unheard of. And here was a man, forgotten by society, speaking as if this broken umbrella had restored his dignity. What was she like? She pressed gently. "Strong," he whispered. "Not strong in body." She was shaking from the cold, but strong in here. He tapped his chest with a trembling finger. Her eyes. They didn't pity me. They respected me. Do you understand? That's rarer than food. The woman nodded slowly. She did understand. And as the veteran spoke, a memory surfaced. The girl she had seen in the cafe that afternoon. Wet sleeves, tired eyes, moving like someone carrying the weight of the world but refusing to give in. It clicked. The girl in the cafe. The girl with the umbrella. They were the same. That night, the businesswoman couldn't shake the image from her mind. As her driver ferried her across the city, she ignored her phone, staring out the rain-streaked window. The glow of traffic lights smeared across the glass like paint. In her mind, she saw two faces, the proud, weary veteran clutching the umbrella, and the determined, exhausted dishwasher hiding behind piles of dishes. She thought of her own past, of doors once opened for her by strangers who had nothing to gain. If not for them, she would not be who she was now. And yet, here was a girl, standing at the same crossroads she once had, with no one to pull her forward. The woman pressed her hand to her lips, her mind made up. I need to see her again. Across town, Aisha lay in bed shivering. Her fever hadn't broken. Her body ached from the long shift. She coughed into her blanket, staring at the ceiling. The rain drummed endlessly outside her window. She thought about the umbrella again, about the veteran. Despite the sickness, despite the mocking laughter of her co-workers, she whispered into the darkness, it was still the right choice. She didn't know that at that very moment, someone else, someone powerful, was thinking about her too. Someone who had heard her story, not from her lips, but from the grateful words of the man she had helped. A storm had begun, not just in the sky, but in Aisha's life. And this storm, unlike the rain outside, was about to change everything. The next morning, the rain still hadn't stopped. The cafe smelled of damp coats and overbrewed coffee, the air thick with steam from the kitchen. Aisha stood at the sink, her head heavy from fever, her hands plunged into hot, soapy water. Each movement was slow, mechanical, her body protesting with every plate she scrubbed. The door chimed. She didn't look up at first, but the staff did. A hush fell across the room, followed by excited whispers. It was her again. The businesswoman stepped inside, shaking the rain from her black coat, her umbrella folding neatly in her hand. She was elegance and control in human form, her heels clicking softly as she crossed the cafe floor. The waitresses straightened their hair and uniforms. The manager rushed forward with his most polished smile. But the woman's eyes moved past them, scanning until they landed on Aisha in the back. Aisha froze, her heart leaping. Why was she looking at her? The woman ordered tea again and sat by the same rain-streaked window. She sipped slowly, her gaze drifting outside, but Aisha felt the weight of it even from across the room. When her break finally came, Aisha carried a tray of clean mugs past the tables. As she passed the woman's seat, a calm voice stopped her. "Excuse me." Aisha turned, startled. The woman gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Would you sit with me for a moment?" The waitresses watched from the counter, wide-eyed with envy. The manager frowned, clearly disapproving. Dishwashers weren't supposed to sit with customers, but Aisha, hesitant, lowered herself into the chair, her hands fidgeting in her lap. The woman leaned in slightly, her eyes kind but piercing. "I want to ask you something. Yesterday, I spoke with a man outside, a veteran." Aisha's breath caught. She said nothing. "He told me a girl gave him her umbrella, her only umbrella. He described her young, tired, but strong." The woman's gaze softened. "Was that you?" Aisha's cheeks burned. She glanced down at her soaked sleeves. Lying would be pointless. Still, pride knotted in her stomach. She didn't want to sound like she was boasting. "Yes," she whispered. "It was me." "Why?" the woman asked simply. Aisha hesitated. She wanted to say she didn't know, that it was instinct. But the truth pressed against her chest. "Because he looked like he had nothing. And she bit her lip. "I don't have much either. But at least I had something to give. And if I walked past him, pretending not to see, I'd be no better than the people who pass me every day." Her voice trembled at the last words. She hadn't meant to reveal so much. The woman studied her in silence for a long moment. Aisha shifted uncomfortably under the weight of her gaze. Finally, the woman spoke. "You know, most people would have kept it. They'd have thought about the rain, about their own health, their own work. They'd have walked by." "I thought about that too," Aisha admitted, her eyes stinging. "I almost walked past him. But then I remembered my mother. She used to say, 'It doesn't matter how little you have. What matters is what you share.'" The woman's expression softened. For the first time, she smiled faintly. "Your mother was right." Before Aisha could say more, the manager stormed over, his tone falsely polite. "Miss, I hope my employee isn't disturbing you. She's supposed to be in the back, not—" "She's not disturbing me," the woman interrupted sharply, her eyes narrowing. "In fact, I asked her to sit here." The manager faltered, his mouth opening and closing. "Oh, well, of course." He retreated quickly, shooting Aisha a glare that promised consequences later. Aisha's stomach twisted, but when she looked back at the woman, she found nothing but calm reassurance in her eyes. The woman placed a bill on the table for her tea and stood. "Thank you for answering me honestly." She looked at Aisha with quiet certainty. "We'll speak again." And just like that, she left, her umbrella snapping open as she disappeared into the rain. Aisha sat frozen, her heart racing. She didn't understand what had just happened, why this powerful stranger cared about her story. All she knew was that for the first time in a long time, someone had truly seen her. And somewhere deep inside, hope flickered. Faint, fragile, but real. That night, the storm raged harder than before, wind whipping the rain against her thin window pane. Aisha sat on her bed, wrapped in her blanket, her body trembling from fever. She stared at the ceiling, the hum of the broken heater rattling in the corner, failing to warm the icy air. Her mind replayed the day again and again. The businesswoman's voice, calm and sharp. "Was that you?" And her own timid reply, "Yes." For a moment, she felt proud. She had spoken her truth without shame. But as the hours passed, pride gave way to worry. Why had the woman asked her that? Why would someone like her, elegant, powerful, clearly wealthy, care about a dishwasher with nothing to her name? Aisha coughed into her sleeve, her body aching. She reached for the pile of unpaid bills on the nightstand and sifted through them with trembling hands. Tuition overdue, rent overdue, electricity overdue. Every envelope screamed the same message. You can't win. She pressed her hands over her face, her voice muffled. What good is kindness if it keeps me here? What if they're right? Maybe I'll never escape. Her chest tightened. She thought of her co-workers' laughter, the way they mocked her for dreaming of college. Their voices echoed in her head. "You'll be stuck here forever." She slammed the bills down, her frustration spilling over. Tears blurred her vision. She whispered bitterly, "I gave away my umbrella, and what did I get? A cold, a pile of debt, and more people laughing at me." But then, unbidden, another memory surfaced. The veteran's face. The way his hands shook as they clutched the umbrella. The way his eyes filled with tears when he realized someone saw him. Really saw him, for the first time in years. She couldn't erase that look from her mind. It had been more than gratitude. It was recognition, a spark of life flickering in someone long abandoned. Her anger softened into something else. She pulled the blanket tighter and whispered, "Maybe it didn't fix my life, but it fixed something for him." Her mother's words returned to her like a quiet echo. "It doesn't matter how little you have. What matters is what you choose to share." Aisha let out a shaky laugh, half a sob. "Mom, I hope you're right. Because if you're wrong, I don't know how much more of this I can take." She rose and went to the tiny mirror above her dresser. Her reflection startled her. Damp hair clinging to her face, dark circles under her eyes, skin pale. She looked like a girl worn down by storms, both inside and out. But behind the weakness, she saw something else. Determination. That stubborn spark that had kept her going through every long shift, every cruel laugh, every red-stamped bill. She touched the glass, whispering to her reflection, one day I'll get out of this. And maybe that umbrella will be the reason why." Outside, the rain hammered on, but for the first time that week, Aisha felt a sliver of peace. She didn't know that while she sat alone, convincing herself her kindness hadn't been wasted, someone else was already planning to return. Not to take from her, but to give her what she thought she'd never have. A chance. The cafe smelled of rain-soaked coats and freshly ground coffee when the door chimed again. Heads turned immediately, and once more, it was her. The businesswoman. Her presence seemed to shift the atmosphere of the entire room. Conversations hushed. Staff straightened their uniforms. The manager plastered on his most servile smile. But unlike other days, the woman didn't glance around casually. She walked in with purpose. Aisha, already at the sink, froze when she saw her. A strange mix of nerves and anticipation jolted through her chest. Why was she here again? The woman ordered tea, as before, and chose the same table near the rain-streaked window. She sat tall, removing her gloves slowly, her eyes scanning the cafe until they landed on Aisha. This time, she didn't look away. During a lull in the rush, the woman raised her hand slightly. "Could I have a moment?" she asked, her voice calm but carrying. The manager, eager to please, hurried over, but she shook her head. "Not you. Her." She nodded toward Aisha. Gasps and whispers rippled among the staff. The waitresses exchanged jealous looks, one muttering under her breath, "What does she see in her?" The manager's smile faltered, his irritation flashing before he masked it again. Aisha hesitated. Her heart pounded as she dried her hands and stepped out from behind the sink. She approached the table cautiously, every step feeling heavier than the last. "Sit," the woman said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Aisha obeyed, clutching her apron nervously. The woman studied her for a long moment before speaking. "What's your name?" "Aisha." "Aisha," she repeated softly, as if testing the sound. "You're in school, aren't you?" Aisha blinked, surprised. I was. I'm trying. But tuition?" She trailed off, ashamed, her gaze dropping to her lap. The woman leaned in slightly. "The veteran told me what you did. He said you gave him your umbrella. Your only umbrella." Aisha swallowed, her cheeks heating. It wasn't a big deal. "It was to him," the woman replied firmly. "Do you know what he said? That you made him feel like a person again. Do you understand the power of that?" Aisha shook her head faintly. "I just couldn't walk past. I know what it feels like to be invisible, to be treated like nothing." The woman's expression softened. For a moment, something vulnerable flickered in her eyes, as if she too knew that feeling. She tapped her fingers lightly on the table. You work here, you study, you're drowning in bills, and yet you still gave away what little you had. That says something. Aisha shifted uneasily. It just felt right, even if it hurt me. The woman tilted her head. Would you do it again? Knowing you'd be sick, knowing your co-workers would mock you, knowing you'd suffer more because of it, would you still give it away? Aisha hesitated, her mind flashing through the misery of the past few days. The fever, the bills, the laughter behind her back. But then she remembered the veteran's face, the way he held the umbrella like it was priceless, the spark of life in his eyes. Yes, she whispered, I'd do it again. The woman's eyes narrowed, not in disapproval, but in deep thought. She nodded slowly, as though Aisha had passed some unspoken test. Their conversation was interrupted by the manager, who stormed over, his patience frayed. Excuse me, but Aisha needs to be working. We can't afford her sitting here. His tone was sharp, laced with irritation. The businesswoman's head snapped toward him. Her voice dropped to a dangerous calm. Are you saying you can't afford your employees showing kindness? Or are you saying you can't afford me, your customer, speaking with her? The manager paled instantly, stammering. No, of course not. I just meant... You meant to humiliate her, the woman cut in coldly. But you should know, men like you never last long in my world. The cafe fell silent. The manager retreated quickly, beads of sweat on his forehead. The other staff avoided looking at Aisha now, as if afraid to be caught in the crossfire. Aisha sat frozen, stunned by the woman's sharp defense. The businesswoman leaned back, her gaze softening again as it returned to Aisha. You don't know it yet, she said quietly, but your life is about to change. She stood, slipping her gloves back on, and walked out into the storm without another word, leaving Aisha trembling with questions. The storm continued its siege of the city, but inside the cafe, the air felt heavier than usual. Every pair of eyes followed Aisha that day. The waitresses whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. The manager barked orders more sharply, clearly shaken from yesterday's encounter. Yet beneath their gossip and bitterness, there was a thin thread of fear. The mysterious woman had defended Aisha, and none of them dared forget it. Aisha herself worked in a haze. Her fever still lingered, her limbs heavy, but her thoughts circled endlessly around the businesswoman's final words. You don't know it yet, but your life is about to change. What could that mean? Was it just kindness from a stranger, or something more? That afternoon, just before closing, the bell above the door chimed again. A hush fell over the cafe. It was her. This time, the woman didn't bother ordering tea. She walked straight to the back, her heels echoing against the tiles, and stopped at the sink where Aisha stood with her hands in soapy water. Aisha, she said softly. The girl startled, nearly dropping a plate. She turned, her apron dripping wet. Yes? Walk with me. The staff gasped. The manager sputtered. She's still on her shift. The woman's gaze cut to him like a blade. Then consider this her last dish for today. No one argued further. Minutes later, Aisha walked beside the woman under the cover of a sleek black umbrella. The rain pelted down, but not a drop touched her now. The woman led her to a quiet corner of the block, near a closed bookstore, where the noise of the city seemed to fade. They stopped. The woman turned to her, her expression softer than Aisha had ever seen it. When I was your age, she began, I had nothing, not even as much as you. Aisha blinked, surprised. The woman's tailored coat, her flawless hair, the commanding way she carried herself, none of it matched the picture of poverty. I grew up in a neighborhood where girls like me were told we'd never matter, the woman continued. One night, I was ready to give up, and then a stranger gave me something small. It wasn't money or power or even opportunity. It was respect. They saw me when no one else did, and that moment changed everything. Her voice dropped lower. I see that same fire in you. The world's been cruel, but you haven't let it make you cruel in return. Aisha's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, but her voice caught. Finally, she whispered, "Sometimes I think it's easier to give up, to stop fighting, to accept what people say about me." The woman shook her head. "If you do that, they win. But if you keep walking, even in the rain, you win. That umbrella you gave away? That wasn't weakness. That was power. You gave dignity to someone the world ignored. And that is more valuable than anything your co-workers could ever mock." Tears welled in Aisha's eyes. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever made her feel seen, truly seen. The woman placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Aisha, I didn't come back here to drink tea. I came back because I believe in you. And I want to know more about you, your life, your dreams, your debts, all of it." Aisha's heart raced. "Why?" The woman's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Because I think it's time someone gave you the chance you've been waiting for." For the first time in weeks, warmth surged through Aisha despite the cold rain. Her doubts didn't vanish, but something stronger rose in their place. Hope. She didn't know what the woman meant exactly, or what would come next. But she felt it in her bones. The storm that had defined her life was about to break. The rain softened into a steady drizzle as they stood together on the quiet street corner. For a long moment, Aisha said nothing, afraid that if she spoke, the fragile thread of hope would snap. The businesswoman's umbrella shielded them both, the storm pattering harmlessly above their heads, almost symbolic. For the first time in days, she wasn't alone under the rain. Finally, the woman broke the silence. Her voice was calm, but firm, the kind of voice that carried decisions, not suggestions. "Aisha," she said, "I know you're drowning in debt. I know you've been fighting to stay in school while working yourself sick. And I know that umbrella you gave away was more than a gesture. It was a symbol of who you are." Aisha blinked quickly, trying to hold back tears. How? How do you know all that?" The woman gave a faint smile. "Because I've asked. I've listened. And I see you. I see your strength, your sacrifices. And I can't ignore it." She took a breath, steady, unwavering. "So here's what I want to do. I will cover your tuition. Every cent. College, books, fees, all of it." The words hit Aisha like a thunderclap. She stared at the woman, wide-eyed, certain she had misheard. You what?" "I'll pay for your education," the woman repeated, her tone gentle now. "No conditions, no strings. You've already proven who you are. You don't owe me anything." Aisha's breath came in short, shaky bursts. Her mind rebelled against the possibility. How could this be real? Just yesterday, she was coughing over dirty dishes, mocked by co-workers, drowning in bills. And now this? Her knees felt weak. She gripped the strap of her apron as though it could anchor her to the ground. "Why me?" she whispered. "There are thousands of students struggling. Why? Why would you choose me?" The woman's eyes softened. "Because you gave away your last umbrella. Because you didn't wait for someone else to help. Because even when the world gave you nothing, you chose to give." Tears spilled freely down Aisha's cheeks. She shook her head. "This can't be real. Things like this don't happen to people like me." The woman stepped closer, her voice steady. "Sometimes they do, and sometimes they happen because you earned them." Aisha covered her mouth with her hands, a sob escaping despite her effort to hold it in. She had dreamed of this moment in secret, some miracle that would free her from the crushing weight of debt, that would let her walk into a classroom without fear of eviction notices chasing her. But dreams had always felt like cruel jokes, taunting her with impossible hope. And now, impossibility stood right in front of her, holding an umbrella, offering her freedom. "What would you say," the woman asked softly, "if tomorrow you didn't have to worry about bills? If tomorrow you could focus only on learning, on becoming who you were meant to be? Aisha's voice cracked. I'd say that tomorrow would be the first day of my real life. The woman smiled, her expression both kind and fierce. Then, tomorrow, your real life begins. Aisha wept openly now, the sound raw but full of release. For once, they weren't tears of frustration or despair, but of disbelief and joy. The woman rested a steady hand on her shoulder, anchoring her. Passers-by hurried by under their own umbrellas, sparing no glance for the scene. To them, it was nothing, just two figures in the rain. But for Aisha, the world had shifted on its axis. One choice, one umbrella. And now, a door she thought forever locked had swung wide open. The next morning, the storm had broken. The sun pierced through heavy clouds, glinting on puddles that lined the streets. For the first time in days, the air smelled clean, almost new. Aisha walked to work in the same old shoes, the same worn jacket, but she was no longer the same girl. Her heart beat with a quiet, dizzying joy. She still hadn't fully processed the woman's words. Tuition covered? All of it. Tomorrow, your real life begins. It felt unreal, like a dream she'd wake from at any second. Yet here she was, carrying the knowledge like a secret flame in her chest. When she stepped into the cafe, the mood shifted instantly. Her co-workers eyed her with thinly veiled suspicion. The manager barked, "You're late," even though she wasn't. The waitresses whispered in the corner. Finally, one sneered aloud, "So, what are you now, the rich lady's charity case?" The others giggled, their laughter sharp as knives. Aisha froze, humiliation creeping up her neck. She wanted to lash out, to defend herself. But before she could speak, another voice cut through the cafe. "You don't get it, do you?" Heads turned. At the doorway stood the veteran. He was still frail, his jacket patched, but his back was straighter. In his hands, he clutched the crooked umbrella like a banner. "It wasn't charity," he said, his voice carrying. "That girl gave me her only umbrella when she had nothing else. She gave me respect when the rest of you wouldn't even look at me. And now she's getting what she deserves." The cafe fell silent. The waitresses looked away, their smirks dissolving. The manager muttered under his breath and retreated to the kitchen. Aisha's eyes filled with tears. She walked over to the veteran and placed her hand gently on his arm. "You didn't have to come." "Yes, I did," he said firmly, "because the world needs to hear about people like you. They'll hear it from me." Word began to spread, first in whispers among the cafe's customers, then in louder voices on the street. The story of the dishwasher who gave away her umbrella and was rewarded by a powerful businesswoman began to ripple through the neighborhood. Some dismissed it as a fairy tale. Others clung to it, repeating it with awe. A local blogger picked it up, posting, "Kindness pays off. Girl helps veteran, receives chance of a lifetime." The post gathered comments. Some were cynical. "This is fake, life doesn't work like that." But many others said things like, "I needed this reminder that good things can happen," or "We should all try to be like her." That evening, after her shift, Aisha and the veteran walked together through the now sunny streets. He leaned on a cane, but his steps were steady. "You don't realize it yet," he said, glancing at her with a small smile. "But what you did wasn't just about me, or you. It's about everyone who hears it. You gave them hope, and hope spreads faster than rain." Aisha's chest tightened with emotion. "I only did what anyone should." He shook his head. "No, you did what most wouldn't. That's why it matters." As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Aisha paused to take it all in. The puddles reflected the light like shards of glass, and for the first time in years, she didn't see only obstacles in front of her. She saw possibility. Her co-workers' laughter, the bills on her nightstand, the endless storms, all of it felt smaller now. Because for the first time, she wasn't walking alone. One umbrella, one choice. And now, her story was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone who believed kindness still mattered. The following week unfolded like a dream Aisha didn't dare believe was real. Every morning, she woke with the same fear, that it had all been a mistake, that the businesswoman's promise was only a kindness spoken in the rain. But then came the phone call, the bursar's office of her college. "Miss Johnson," the voice said, "your tuition balance has been cleared. Paid in full?" Aisha sat frozen on her bed, clutching the phone so tightly her knuckles whitened. She whispered, "What?" "It's all been handled," the clerk repeated. "Your account is now in good standing. You're officially re-enrolled for the semester." The line clicked off. Aisha dropped the phone onto her blanket and buried her face in her hands. Sobs racked her body. Not of despair this time, but of relief so fierce it almost hurt. Days later, she walked across the college campus again. The familiar red brick buildings rose around her, their windows glowing with the soft light of classrooms. Students hurried past with backpacks slung over their shoulders, chatting, laughing, living lives she had once thought forever closed to her. But this time, she wasn't an outsider. She carried her own books, her student ID shining new in her wallet. Every step felt like reclaiming a piece of herself that had been stolen by debt and despair. She passed by the science hall, where she had once lingered outside, too afraid of being expelled for non-payment to go inside. Now, she pushed the door open confidently, breathing in the smell of chalk and polished floors. That afternoon, she sat in her first lecture. A professor spoke about cell structures, diagrams glowing on the projector screen. Aisha scribbled notes furiously, her pen flying across the page. She didn't care if she was behind. She didn't care if she had to work twice as hard. Every word felt like gold. For the first time in years, her mind was free to focus on learning, not on the next bill, the next shift, the next insult whispered behind her back. And when the professor asked a question, she raised her hand. Tentatively at first, then higher, steadier, her voice clear as she answered. Students turned to look at her. Some nodded with respect. Aisha's heart soared. Later that evening, she walked home from campus under a clear sky. The streets still glistened from recent rain, but no storm clouds loomed above. She clutched her books to her chest, breathing in the crisp air. She stopped outside the bookstore where she had first seen the veteran. He was there again, sitting on a bench, the old umbrella propped beside him like a loyal friend. When he saw her, his face lit up. "You did it," he said proudly, his voice breaking. Aisha smiled, tears gathering in her eyes. "No, we did it." He chuckled softly. "No, girl, you did it. You proved the world wrong." They sat together for a while, watching the passers-by. For once, Aisha wasn't in a rush. She had time now, time to breathe, to dream, to build the life she had almost lost. And as the night fell, she thought back to that stormy evening. One act of kindness, one broken umbrella, had led her here. It hadn't been easy. It had cost her comfort, health, even dignity. But it had also opened the door to her future. Aisha whispered to herself, "Mom, you were right. What matters is what you share." Her voice carried softly into the night, like a promise. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of wet pavement and blooming trees. Aisha walked home with her books pressed to her chest, her steps light despite the weight she carried. Her mind buzzed with excitement, but there was one thing she knew she had to do before she could rest. She reached her tiny room, slipped inside, and set her books gently on the desk. Then she picked up her old phone. Her hands trembled, not from fever this time, but from anticipation. She scrolled through her contacts until she landed on a familiar number, her mother's. The line clicked after 2 rings. "Aisha," her mother's tired voice came through, laced with concern. "Is everything all right? You sound out of breath." Aisha's throat tightened. For weeks, she had hidden her struggles, pretending she was fine while drowning in debt and despair. Tonight, she couldn't hold it in anymore. "Mom," she whispered, tears already rising. "I have to tell you something. Something amazing." Her mother's voice sharpened with worry. "What is it?" Aisha laughed through the tears. "My tuition is paid. All of it. I'm back in college. For real this time. I don't have to drop out. I don't have to keep begging for extensions. It's done. I'm free." There was silence on the line. Then a gasp. "What? How? Aisha? Are you serious?" "Yes," Aisha cried. "It's real. A woman, a businesswoman. She found out about me, about the umbrella, about the veteran. She believed in me, Mom, and she's paying for everything." Her mother sobbed softly. "Oh, baby. I prayed every night that something would change, that someone would see you for who you are. And now," Aisha pressed the phone tighter to her ear, her own tears streaming. "It happened, Mom. It really happened." Later that evening, she called her younger brother. His voice cracked with excitement. "Does this mean you won't have to work every night? You'll actually get to study like normal students?" "Yes," she said with a shaky laugh. "It means I get to be me again." He shouted to their neighbors, his pride impossible to contain. "My sister's going back to college, for real this time." After the calls, Aisha sat alone in her room, the pile of unpaid bills still stacked on the nightstand. They no longer weighed on her shoulders. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like her life was defined by red stamps and overdue notices. She picked up one of her textbooks and opened it. The words blurred through her tears, but she read anyway, each line a reminder that she had a future now. Her mind returned to that night in the storm. The broken umbrella, the shivering veteran, the choice that had felt so small, yet so costly. She thought of how her co-workers had laughed, how she had doubted herself, how close she had come to believing kindness was pointless. And yet that choice had rippled outward, reaching a man on the street, a powerful woman in a cafe, and now her family across town. Aisha closed her eyes, whispering, "One act. That's all it took. One act, and everything changed." She drifted to sleep that night with her textbooks on the bed beside her, the sound of the city quiet outside her window. And in her dreams, she walked across a stage in a graduation gown, holding a diploma. For the first time, the dream didn't feel like a cruel fantasy. It felt like a promise. A week later, the rains returned. The city streets glistened once more, reflecting neon signs and street lamps in shimmering puddles. But this time, Aisha walked differently. Her jacket was still the same old one, worn at the sleeves, but in her hand she carried a new umbrella. Not a cheap one, not bent or broken, but strong, wide, and sturdy. A gift from the businesswoman, wrapped with a simple note. For the storms still to come. Walk through them with pride. Aisha smiled as she opened it, the canopy blossoming above her head. Rain tapped harmlessly against it, rolling away instead of soaking her. Each drop reminded her of how far she had come. She turned down the familiar street where she had once seen him, the veteran, huddled in the storm. And there he was again, though this time not slumped in despair. He sat on a bench beneath the bookstore's awning, his patched jacket zipped, his posture straighter. The crooked umbrella she had given him was still by his side, its bent frame a badge of honor. When he saw her, his face lit up. "Aisha!" His voice carried warmth that pierced the rain. She hurried over, her new umbrella sheltering them both. "How are you?" "Better," he said with a smile. "Not just because of the umbrella, because of what it meant. People talk to me now. They ask about you. They call me the man who was seen." His eyes softened. "And I'll never forget that it started with you." Aisha's throat tightened. "You gave me something too. You reminded me why kindness matters." They sat together, the storm around them like background music rather than punishment. For a moment, the city seemed to fade, leaving only two souls bound by one small act that had reshaped both their lives. Aisha thought of the businesswoman, of her mother's tears on the phone, of her brother's joy. She thought of the classroom she had returned to, the books now hers to study without fear. And she realized this wasn't just her story anymore. It was theirs, the veterans, the businesswomen's, her families, everyone who had heard about the umbrella and felt hope spark again in their hearts. As the rain eased into a gentle drizzle, Aisha rose. She lifted her new umbrella high, looking toward the horizon where sunlight began to pierce through the clouds. Her voice was steady, almost a vow. No storm lasts forever, and sometimes all it takes to see the sun again is one choice. She walked down the street, the veteran watching proudly, her silhouette framed against the breaking sky. The crooked old umbrella leaned against his side, a reminder of the night everything changed. Above her, the storm clouds parted, light spilling onto the city. And for the first time in her life, Aisha walked not only with protection from the rain, but with the certainty that her future was hers to claim.